My name's Deb Cartwright and I'm the Chief Executive of Oasis Domestic Abuse Service. My role here is to make sure that the charity is able to support as many victims of domestic abuse as possible, helping to raise money and ensure that the services are really effective. Oasis puts on an event at POW2019 every year, the Arts Festival for Women, because we are primarily a women's charity. We do work with and help men, but we are primarily a women's charity, so it's really important to us to celebrate International Women's Day. And we put on an event at POW each year in order to do that. So this year we put on the Power of Women, and this came about because last year I read Mary Beard's Women in Power, and I read it and realised that Mary Beard was quite articulate about the concept of victimhood for women, and that was an allowable narrative for them. And that's really, really relevant to our work, because women become very much trapped within their victimhood when they're experiencing domestic abuse. So I thought it would be great to bring together a cross-section of women who could talk about Mary Beard's book and look at it from the point of view of our cultural context today and how they relate to that through their own worlds. So there were several women on the panel, and they came from a range of backgrounds, and we wanted really for them to be able to speak from different perspectives. So we had women who work in the charity sector and lead organisations, right through to a camerawoman who makes films and has a really unique experience of that herself as a woman in that field, and then to a fashion stylist who is very much about empowering women through fashion, and then right through to a filmmaker and a therapist, and also the head of the Turner Contemporary. So these women all came together and had a really, really useful discussion about what it meant for them to have power in today's society.
Hello everybody, my name's Jan Dunn, and welcome to POW2019, and happy International Women's Day, as it is actually International Women's Day today. And this is one of the events that POW2019 are running. I'm here today to host this discussion of Mary Beard's Women in Power, which I think we've all read several times now probably. Just out of interest, how many people in the audience have read the book? Oh, okay. Well, just as an introduction to myself, I'm a filmmaker, and I'm a writer-director, so I work in a very male-dominated environment. We'll come back to that in a bit. I'd like to introduce the panel to you today. Our panel includes Victoria Pomery, who is the director of the Turner Contemporary and has been involved in that building since its inception, right from the very beginning. Rebekah Sunshine, who is an artist, coach, counsellor, and specialises in sexuality, would you say? Steph Dickinson, who is managing director of Pie Factory Music, which is based in Thanet generally, or specifically in Ramsgate?
We're based in Ramsgate, work across Thanet and Dover.
Okay. We have Cynthia Lawrence-John, who's a costume designer and a stylist, and by her own admission, someone who loves people.
Hates fashion.
And we have Lenny Whitehall, sitting at the end there, who's a cinematographer and a photojournalist who specialises in anthropological filmmaking. So that's us. I was going to set off the discussion by perhaps opening this to whoever would like to contribute to our own experiences of power and women in power within the roles that we work. For myself as a filmmaker, and as I say as a film director, I think it's probably become much more kind of national news nowadays rather than just trade news. And more people are aware of the fact that there's so few women directing films. There's just as many of us out there, but for whatever reason there's been a disparity in my industry for many years. I decided I wanted to be a film director in 1977 after seeing a film by Nicholas Roeg called Walkabout, which some of you may be aware of. I was just talking about it earlier with Cynthia, who was aware of this film. And I suddenly realised how you could tell a film without too much dialogue. And I was involved in a youth theatre, and I had thought I'd want to be an actress, but I decided after watching that film that I'd like to be a film director. Now those were the days in 1977 when you had to go to a library to do any research. So I took myself down to the library and I tried to find how I would become a director. I couldn't find any women anywhere, certainly in the UK. Some years later, I came to know a few that was suddenly appearing in Australia, and there were some appearing in America. And it took me quite a long time, until 2005, before I actually directed my first feature film. So that's my own experience of women in my industry and taking on that job that I wanted to do when I was a teenager. I don't know, perhaps we'd like to talk to Lenny maybe about cinematography, moving on from there.
Well, I started in the camera department, and when I started, when I left school, there were no women in the camera department in this country, in the union. So in your careers advice, it would never have come up. I was very lucky. I was trained by Skill Set, and they wanted to improve the amount of women coming into the industry doing technical jobs. So they very kindly made sure they took 50% of the 10 people they chose that year to make sure that there were women. And I'm very grateful for that. But quite interesting, when I turn up for a job, everyone knows me as Lenny, so they're expecting a 6'4" struggling bloke, and I turn up, and they've always thought that the actress is here, or the makeup artist, and when I'd look at their face and say, oh no, actually I'm here for the camera, they would look at me and say things like, well, can you lift it? I mean, we've got someone else. And I'd always say, well, actually, no, that's when I give it to a man to do, I give it to a boy. And they'd go, oh, that's okay then. And then I'd go, no, obviously I'm joking. And then they'd realise, and I kind of think gentle good humour is the way to change the world. So I think with that, it is the way to do it. And now I'd like to say that things, we're not at 50%, but things have moved rapidly. We see many more women behind the camera, which is wonderful. I think Emmerdale are doing their all-female crew tonight, and that includes all the technicians. So things are changing. Couldn't have done that 30, 40 years ago. So there is progress.
Victoria, what's your experience in working in the art world, maybe? You could...
So, well, in the art world, I think traditionally lots of women have been involved in museums and galleries, particularly at that end, and until quite recently, they went up into an organisation to maybe the deputy director, head of a department, but they were not necessarily the director. So I think, like the film industry, a lot has changed and moved on. There are many more women directors. I think the Arts Council recently published some research which said that there is still some way to go, but there are more women running arts organisations around the UK. I think what we see with artists generally is, if you look at programmes going back 20, 30, 40 years, quite often, predominantly the artists being shown were men. And that is, there are a variety of factors which are about that. So I think things are starting to change, and galleries are programming many more women artists, and I think the galleries, the commercial sector, are also working with many more women. So I think overall it's positive. Things have definitely moved on. There's been a lot of change, and obviously Maria Balshaw is now the Chief Executive Director of Tate, which has made a huge difference in terms of the sector. But I think there's still room for more change and much more diversity in thinking about. The Arts Council has an initiative called the Creative Case, which is really about encouraging people from other, not just women, but looking at people who might be marginalised, giving other people opportunities to take on power, and with that power to use that sensibly to affect change.
How about you, Rebekah? Your industry, I would have thought your role is kind of generally thought of as a more female role, I suppose, in counselling and...
It is. My background is sociology, so I've got a degree in sociology and fine art. And how I use that in my work now, so I'm a coach and a counsellor, primarily for people with issues around sexuality and identity and roles. And how I use the sociology and that thinking is how we talk about structures and about permission to take power, personal power, sexual power, also how they want to present themselves, how they hold themselves back, their responsibilities, and hopefully show them that there's other ways to find their authentic selves.
And actually, Cynthia, what's interesting with your particular role, again, I think often people would think a costume designer is likely to be female, but Can you reveal the truth about our industry probably around that?
That's quite true, actually, to be honest with you. There's no, I'd say the majority of people who work within the costume department or even hair, makeup and styling departments, whether it's in fashion or film, are female. It just is, it's the way it goes. But I was recounting to you earlier on, you've probably noticed this, that, on a set, if you're in costume or glam, as they call it, glam, if you need to do something, which is quite important because you do actually very often need to do things to make it, to just do what you need to do, it's your job. And you very often hear this thing, and you'll recognise it's like, just waiting for glam, you get this almost like this, like eyes rolling the first AD announcing to the whole set that actually the reason we're waiting is because of the glam department, which we all know is female, and it's just the way it is. So I have some assistants who get quite upset by that, and I'm like, you cannot get upset by that. You need to, as you said, you almost need to reverse it sometimes and have a sense of humour and just reverse what you're, what's been said. But yeah, But what's interesting, I work in fashion and film, and the fashion industry is definitely male-dominated. And fashion is lagging behind in many ways, but I don't want to be one of these people who sits here and says, oh, it's all doom and gloom, because it's not. I think sometimes you just need to, in my mother's words, just get on with it. Get on with it, because sometimes you can be your own worst enemy, I think.
Mm-hmm. And Stephanie, how about you as a businesswoman as well as somebody working in the music industry? Talk us through your scenario with live action music.
Yeah, it's quite varied. I've had a similar situation with Lenny in that, being a Steph, I've had a lot of people assume that I'm a Stefan, which sometimes has played to an advantage, but it's in the charity sector. There's definitely a disparity between a workforce that is led by women, but not many women in senior leadership positions. And interestingly for me, it's only been in the last few years that I've even had a female mentor as in a sort of leadership position. I've always had male mentors. So I think there's definitely work to be done. I've definitely been empowered by men and women, which is really good news. But I see it as, our job with young people is that they become empowerers of men and women across the board, and that's our job.
Mm-hmm. The next thing I was going to actually touch upon from Mary Beard's book is the look of a powerful woman. I particularly like her section on the pantsuit, Hillary Clinton's pantsuit, and that great picture on page 16, if anybody's got the book there, of Hillary Clinton and Angela Merkel with their power suits on. Maybe coming over to you, Cynthia, might be a good start there with how to dress the powerful woman. I mean, if you've got a male director sitting in front of you and you've got a character, I mean, how does that conversation usually start?
If I have a character, what?
A powerful managing director, like Steph.
I guess we've... don't do that. But I think the thing with fashion and stylists, there's certain codes almost, the way we all dress, it's a form of communication, whether we like it or not. I mean, I love to hate fashion, but, as I keep saying, recounting over and over, but there's certain codes and just signifiers which, some work in our advantage, and I think others definitely don't work in our advantage, to be honest with you. So I know that if I'm going to certain meetings, I like to feel like myself. I don't want anyone to determine or anyone to dictate how I dress, but I know I'm treated differently in certain situations if I'm wearing certain clothes. Whether you like it or not, that's the way it works. And I just think it's up to us, or women, it's like to push things along slightly, so we're not still back in the dark ages if a woman wears a certain dress or whatever, then she's not taken seriously. But these codes definitely do exist, but we need to push them.
How about you when you're on set, Lenny?
I think there
is there a costume that you'd wear as a
There is. I always realised, I realised quite early on, that how I turned up on set on the first day was going to set the tone. And I had certain combat trousers and sort of DM boots and a certain top I'd wear. I never wore makeup, I always had my hair tied back. And I knew if I went in like that, I never really talked to people, I never made any jokes, I was just really focused and just got on with it, head down for the first morning. I knew by 12 o'clock those kind of nervous looks of like, oh my God, what's she doing? Or she's in charge of hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of gear. All of that would go, and by day 2 or 3, people had would trust me. But it was very important. I knew that first morning what I wore, how I came across, and afterwards I could be my usual kind of quite dappy self, and that was fine. People trusted me, but I had to really work at earning their trust, and I knew that was a package. It is.
Yeah.
And Victoria, are there kind of glamorous scenarios where you've had to turn up and you're expected to be looking a certain way? I mean, I'm thinking in my industry, for the Cannes Film Festival, there was a big furore a few years ago, and Kristen Stewart took her heels off on the red carpet to make a stand against this ridiculous concept that women had to, their idea of women looking glamorous would be high heels. And of course there's a lot of producers out there who are women producers who really don't like having to dress up in that sense, just to perform on the red carpet when they're people who stand behind the camera anyway and don't really want to be seen in public. And you probably have a lot of pressure to look a certain way when you go to some of those sort of high things you have to go to in your position.
Well, I think there is an expectation at one level, but at another level I think the visual arts is very open, and quite often artists, say the Turner Prize dinner, the artists, they want to express themselves how they want to express themselves. So I don't think there's any sort of formal dress codes in that way. I find it much more worrying if I'm invited to an accountancy company's dinner. Because actually there are sort of expectations about how women would look, or some of the award ceremonies that I've been to across Kent where it's black tie and it's formal, and the arts I think are much more liberal, and people don't really mind if at a black tie dinners in the arts sector are very few and far between, but
I think
you're
you're
much
right.
more open.
But it's interesting how, I mean, talking of Cannes Film Festival, it's, for a guy, they can just put a suit on and walk up a carpet. And for me, I've always found that there's something much harder than being a woman director, and that's coming from a working class background and growing up poor. Just the idea of me being a film director. But the great thing about a director is you're the one who turns up to the meetings in the jeans. And potentially you're the one who could walk up the red carpet in the jeans. So it kind of, in effect, it doesn't really affect that role I have in dressing a certain way. How about you, Steph?
For me, I think I'm quite aware that I'm always casually dressed and very rarely will dress up, just as a matter of choice. But for me, it's about weighing up the message that I'm bringing. If the message I'm bringing is more important than the clothes I'm wearing, then I'll dress up. And so I kind of weigh up actually so I do dress like this all the time because actually this is who I am, so I want that to be who I am in every meeting, but I am aware in meetings where I'm like negotiating contracts and it's for other people, actually that message is more important than making a statement about what I'm wearing. So
but going to the gender disparity, I'm wondering, as Mary Beard talks about it, potentially starting from the beginning in a domestic environment, from a home environment. We were talking on the way, Lenny, you have an interesting point to make about the home environment, because I have a daughter who's 8 years old, and I'll go into a shop with her about clothes, for instance, and there'll be an aisle for the girls and an aisle for the boys, and I'm trying to instill in her that it's complete nonsense, and she doesn't have to go to the girls' aisle, and she doesn't have to go to the boys' aisle. But then there's so much pressure at school with what they have to wear and how they have to behave. But you were talking about the home environment too, Lenny. You made an interesting point.
Well, I think it starts at home. So, for example, we have things like the head of the table. So, I grew up, and I think most people did the idea the head of the table was reserved for the man. And I say, let's make round tables. Let's get away with heads. Let's have it start. We don't realise these very small acts that happen every day reinforce certain beliefs and stereotypes. And I think we need to start there and just bring consciousness. And again, it doesn't need a huge rewrite, it needs tiny changes. There was a great BBC documentary, or BBC Two. They went to school and they stripped out all the gender things for boys and girls, and the teachers weren't even aware of it. They'd say love to the girls and mate to the boys. All of that went, they treated them completely equally. The results were amazing. The girls ended up, after 6 months, wanting to be engineers, astronauts. Their view of what they could be changed, and the great thing for the young boys their behaviour changed. Some of the boys that had difficulty communicating, their social skills, their emotional skills, the ability to be able to express themselves had also dramatically changed, and they were much more sensitive, and all that kind of strange aggressive behaviour had gone. So for both genders, the outcome was extremely positive, and they were going to implement those changes. So I'm a real believer. It starts at home, at school, right from the beginning.
But I think what's interesting about Mary Beard's book is that she really talks about that history and how, well, you've studied classics, so hand back to you. But I think she really talks about the history and how that has meant that the conditioning in the Western world has been based on that history, the Greeks in particular, and all those amazing myths. But they all have a sort of sense of it's his story rather than her story.
And that's interesting because when I read this book at the weekend for potentially being on this panel, I hadn't realised what such a different lens it was to look at those characters from a woman's perspective. I was taught those characters through the eyes of men 30 years ago, so for me it was quite revelatory. And I went to see The Odyssey, and I'm just going to give them a plug, The Pantaloons, amazing production. And it was great because at the end, the character of Penelope, the story is she sat upstairs for 20 years waiting for Odysseus to get home, and she's been weaving for 20 years. And she does this great song at the end, and she says, you know what, I wasn't actually sitting weaving for 20 years. I, got a black belt into karate, I've learned to play these instruments, I've managed a hedge fund. It was hilarious. She had literally, everyone had depicted her as doing a bit of weaving, but actually, essentially, she'd conquered everything in the world. It was a wonderful parody of what we're taught, through the classics.
Mm-hmm. But going back artistically, historically speaking, there's all those women in history who are really couldn't be painters.
Yeah, exactly, and people who are not written in, they're not in the history at all. They're completely left out, and I'm sure that's true of other art forms as well as the visual arts. But how is it that we don't hear about them, or we suddenly rediscover someone like Dorothea Tanning, who's showing at Tate Modern at the moment? Seems a key artist, but actually we haven't heard that much about her for very long.
That's the same with music, isn't it, Steph? Yeah, and I think it's kind of looking at that, and I think it's looking at that and thinking about how do we make sure that doesn't happen now? What are the stories happening now that need to be shared and need attention? So it's about the cultural change, but it's also about, let's be real about what's happening now. Let's elevate those that need elevating. I think it's across the board. Mm-hmm. And going back to the classics, I remember in Mary's book about the references to the kind of the use of language of the sounds that women make, the squealing and the braying and the mooing of these characters. And as she says, those classical female characters that none of them are portrayed in any kind of positive way, even when they take control or take power. Medusa is just one example of many. Medea is another sort of example of these women who don't utilise power well. They kind of they abuse power in a greater sense. But I like the visuals as well that she refers to. That the fact that the Medusa character, when she was doing a Google of it, she was aware of the one picture of Hillary Clinton, but when she did the Google, there were these hundreds and hundreds of images of Medusa with this hair, and the visual images of women. What does that do to young girls, would you say, Rebekah?
I think it's. I think we're at a really fortunate position in history, and like Sylvia's mum said, you get on with it. You just get on with it. And I found it interesting that you said about walking down the red carpet at Cannes and you wanted to wear jeans, or that you couldn't. You actually could have. No one would say, get off, you're not allowed to do it.
They sent a whole group of the production team from Carol off the red carpet, one of the security officers, which is what started the furore about.
Okay, I didn't know that.
They didn't have high heels on.
But I do believe that we are in a position whereby there comes a time we have to take responsibility for our own shit, and we have to be stronger, and it will be hard. And I mean that across the whole board. So, and I think we can only lead we can be brave and do stuff and be pioneering, and then the children will see what their parents are doing, what their peers, older peers are doing, what the music industry is doing, what the fashion industry is doing.
But what can we do? What can our generation do about changing the power? I mean, I know that it was only when Beryl Richards, a film director, became the chairperson of Directors UK that we started pushing as an organisation, campaigning in force for the 50-50 campaign and pushing that through and trying to get the BFI to do something. Fortunately, Ben Roberts, who's now running the BFI, has stood up to the mark, and he is actually doing something about it now. But it seems it's so late for that to be happening. There's a whole generation of women like myself. I don't know about your job, Lenny, but I think potentially women in my position now, we're going to potentially face ageism, which I don't think the men necessarily face. I mean, Ridley Scott's in his 70s and still directing movies.
But I think that's perhaps our challenge, as we were perhaps a generation who went forth and did the jobs we wanted to do, regardless of whether women had been allowed to have access to them before or not. It's up to our generation. I thought a few years how I'd be able to retire. When I started work, I was told that I could retire at 60. And let me tell you, it's a bit of a shock when I looked at my pension forecast the other day, and I've got years left. So it's that thing that we're going to have to be that generation that prove that actually women can keep working till our 70s. And I think we will face ageism, but we're going to have to change that. Now, just something I wanted to add in, when you spoke about the language that was used in the classical era to portray women as the insanity of when they took power. Nowadays, when women take power, a businessman is described as savvy or shrewd or something. Women are still the kind of language we use around them. We tend to say they're manipulative. We have a different language for how women exercise power in high positions and men. Things like that we need to examine and look at and be aware of, and again, change. So change will happen, but it will happen on many levels. So the language we use will bring awareness and hopefully change, and also, like I say, going forward, facing ageism, we're just going to have to battle those boundaries down, aren't we? And have as much fun as we possibly can doing it, and not get ground down by it,
I watched this book is actually on YouTube. Mary Beard did a lecture, and it literally is word for word. It's really interesting. And when she was describing the Medusa and the Trump images, Trump holding up Hillary Clinton's head, and when she was describing it, I thought she would say, and this is really, she said, and this was, she described it as laughable. And also she talked about a headline on the front page of the Telegraph that was saying about women going to grab power because they're going to be the head of the church, the head of the police, and head of something else, I think. Yeah, head of the BBC. And she talked about a grab of power, and she said, it's laughable that so many people would just take that and not even question it. And I thought it was interesting that she used the word laughable. She didn't say it was scary. She didn't say, she just thought it was like, it's pathetic. We need to rise up above it, not, it's scary, I'm a victim, I need to be. And I felt quite empowered by it.
I think it's important for us not to be victims, particularly for our younger sisters, daughters, etc. And to quote Bob Marley, and I will quote Bob Marley, but one thing he always said was, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, number ourselves and free our minds. And I think that's what Kanye West was trying to say, but didn't actually articulate it very well at all. So what he should have done is actually Bob Marley. But to me, that almost sums, when I read this book, and I must admit I still have about 10 pages to read, I won't lie, but that quote sums it up for me, really, that we're responsible now at this time, at this stage. Particularly, I feel, I'm 49, I feel at this moment that I can really, through my experiences and what I've been through as a young girl, even when I was in my teens, etc., I could really mentor and teach and help the younger generation, from like girls of 4, 5, 6, 7, 20, whatever. And I think that is what, in some ways, we should be doing, actually. And I think it's quite important, as you grow older as well, I've done this, is to reinvent yourself, because obviously your concerns and things that interested you when you were 20, they would have changed. There's other ways in which we can find ourselves and find a place for ourselves. And as far as I'm concerned, age does not even come into it for me. I absolutely refuse. I'm not having any of it at all. And can I just say something? I've realised I've worked with this woman on set, and she's fierce. I remember now that I'm scared of you. There's very few people on set I'm frightened of, and I remember now. And I shouldn't say frightened. Do you know what it is? It's respect. Yeah. That's what it is. It's respect. And I think that's what us as women need to make sure that's what we need to have. We need to demand and command respect. Yeah. And this is going back to, you know, the women's voices, and, you know, if you're a woman, you're meant to be really shrill and speak like that, which, you know, already is just, you know, we're hysterical, aren't we, if we speak our minds or if we speak in a certain way. So sometimes I just think, if that's what society projects onto you, if you speak in a certain way, change it around and just refocus and speak in a way whereas people can't actually instantly put that label on you. That's how I see it.
I was talking earlier about my first experience on my first feature film as a director, absolutely day one. The crew, which was predominantly male, weren't really listening to a word I was saying until the producer repeated verbatim exactly what I was saying, and they would listen. And then the sound recordist, who was actually another female in a male role, actually said to me, "You've got to grow some balls, Jan, if you're going to be a director." Yeah. And I mean, I would never normally have operated that way, but I did find myself lowering my voice slightly, making eye contact, and just speaking in a much more firmer manner that was probably naturalistic
to me. It's assertion. Do you remember I was saying to you when we first sat here that, you know, and I fall into this very often, so I don't think I'm wonderful, but, you know, a man, and excuse any men in this room who are going to be offended by this, but men hold their space. From this age, you're taught, if you're speaking, even if you're telling the most banal, boring story, okay, men will continue. Sorry, I'm not. I wasn't looking at you, but you laugh, so I laugh with you. You're taught, but listen, men will continue, whereas a woman will literally try and say it really quick and get over it. She could actually say the most important thing in the world, but a woman will quickly and go like this. And it's something we're taught from being young women, and I'm still trying to get over that. And I told you the story when I was sat in a meeting, and the producer, you know, I was in a big production meeting, and the producer was talking about the costume, and I just sat there nodding, smiling. And afterwards, he pulled me to one side and said, "I'm not paying you to sit and nod and smile." We were like, "Oh my God, he's absolutely right," because I was doing this. I was head of department, yet I was quite happy to sit and nod and smile and for him to speak for me, and that's always stuck with me. It's the best thing he ever said that someone ever said to me. So anyway, sorry.
No, that's great. Now you've apologised. That's why
that we don't even realise how ingrained. It's so ingrained in our society, and it has been for millennials as married.
I mean, certainly, I think now I did start a girls' film club in Ramsgate, which I'm just passionate about, absolutely passionate about. There's three of us who really kind of, and Sylvie's in the audience here, and she's one of those mentors as well. Sylvie's a filmmaker, and we've managed to get 9 of them through into the BFI Youth Academy over the last 3 years, which I'm very proud of, particularly because they're women. And I think if all of us can do stuff like that, if all of us can give our time to do anything we can for those young women who want to be in managerial roles or heads of anything, whichever sphere it might be, music. I don't know if you have anything similar going on at Pie Factory.
Just wanted to pick up on one thing Sylvie said that really struck me. I've been thinking a lot about this whole victim voice, especially in the light of the Me Too campaign and things like that. And I feel like there's another voice that we need to give emphasis to, which is the voice of vulnerability. And I think that's both for females and for males, and I think that's different to victim. And I think there's something about teaching ourselves, our parents, our kids to be themselves, and that's vulnerable. So, and I've started practicing that. Actually, since I had a child, I really felt my leadership changed, and I felt really empowered not to try and lead like a man. And I had been leading like a man before that, whatever that means. And so I went back to work very much more vulnerable, and I spoke about things that I was scared about, and I'm not afraid to cry in meetings, and I'm leading out of that place, which is fascinating and scary. But what we're seeing is young people starting to be real. and there's less of this like struggle for power, and it's more about let's be real and honest, and I really think that's how we change the world. I really
human.
think, yeah, human, because I'm never going to be like anyone else, so I've got to lose all of that, and when we as leaders start to lead like that, I think that's when it changes things.
How about the Turner Contemporary? Is there anything that you're doing that specifically may be life enhancing and promoting gender equality for the future generation of those people who are interested in the sort of curatorial role, perhaps?
Well, I hope that lots of things that we do at Turner Contemporary have a transformational impact on lots of people. I think we're very focused on diversity at the moment and trying to get a diverse programme in what people see, but also in terms of staffing, in terms of the Board of Trustees. So I think we are trying to make change in terms of how we support people to develop their curatorial skills. Last year we developed an exhibition called Journeys with the Wasteland, which was all about handing over the curatorial process to members of the public. So that was anybody could have been part of the research group and participated prior to, and that was a 3-year project, but actually gave people huge amounts of additional knowledge, as well as giving the organisation and people working in the institution lots of knowledge. And I think it's more about saying everyone has huge amounts of creative potential, and everyone's an expert in something. It might not be the thing that we necessarily think they're an expert in. So I think that it's that sort of programme with working with a studio group where we let, I just said, studio group go away, you select and commission an artist to make a piece of work. That resulted in the piece called The Three Graces, which was in the Sunley Gallery. Lots of local people helped support the artist Nadine Chowdhury to make this amazing piece of work. So I think something about changing one's practice and really thinking differently is the way to empower other people. But yes, as I've said, we've still got some way to go, and I think it's about ensuring that one's changing all the time, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily go quite according to plan, but at least you're pushing yourself in the right direction.
And it is important, the empowering people and giving people opportunity and giving people a legitimate opportunity for their own voice, not put them in the victim space. So you're the victim, I'm the hero, aren't I good? It's actually saying, what's your story?
Yeah.
I don't want to talk for you, but I'll give you the platform to talk.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing.
So do we think anything has actually changed in light of the Me Too campaign? Because there's an afterword to Mary's book where it was reprinted, because it was originally published before the Me Too campaign, and following the Me Too campaign it seemed obvious for her to do a reprint with an afterword with that. Do we think things have changed very much? I certainly think maybe the Me Too campaign has empowered young women particularly to perhaps come forward to declare any harassment they're having. But whether it's done anything as far as tangible empowerment, I don't know.
I think it's empowered everybody. I think it's brought harassment out of the shadows into the mainstream. Okay, it was set up for women to voice it, but I think it's been really good for men as well, who have been either sexually harassed or abused or something, or even just bullying.
But Trump has reduced the law again now, hasn't he? He's taken out the coercive element of the domestic abuse in the American legal system. So it's like 10 steps backwards.
We fought very hard for that to go in.
Yeah. So it's like, and then I think of that image in the book of his face superimposed onto the holding the Medusa head of Hillary Clinton again.
But maybe,
Go.
I was going to say maybe that's actually a sign that the grip is tightening where things are being shaken up. Maybe that, because I definitely think there's been a change. I was at a conference in the new year where a friend of mine who's in her late 60s disclosed being raped at 19 in front of a packed conference about justice, and there was something really important about her sharing her story, and a lot of people actually spoke about it, and it was, that's one example, just personally, but
it's funny, I had a bit of a horrible experience the other day, but it took me back to something that happened when I was a girl. So I was on a train the other day, a chap in the waiting room in Canterbury decided to start doing a sexual act, and I went to tell the people I didn't think it was appropriate he should be allowed to get on the train. He was in a state, it was not appropriate behaviour, and I went to alert the people at the station, and they were amazing. Ended up we couldn't get the police in time. It was a long thing. Trains got delayed. It was a huge thing. But at least what was amazing was all the guys on the station were absolutely disgusted by this, and they weren't going to let it happen. They were aware it was about to be school time. The school children come out. They were there. They were all on it. They were told, but they went to such length to try and when this guy got off the train at Ramsgate to get him. And I thought back to the first time that ever happened when I saw a man doing that. I was 11 years old. And, I thought, then, God, the difference when we had the police then. And I just remember him laughing, saying to me as a little girl, was he playing with himself? Now, I didn't know what a man, act was at 11. I didn't know what it meant, playing them. I had no idea, obviously. But it's interesting how, in my lifetime, the difference of when somebody behaves like that in public, a man, the difference that men perceive it and treat it and deal with it has completely changed. And that is the kind of result that's happened, a tangible result that's happened because of things like Me Too. It's brought it to the fore. We've all men have got daughters, wives, mothers. It lets us have a conversation, and we can redefine where, moving forward, our boundaries as a society are going to be. And that's both for men and women. I think that's a really good thing.
And that's why it then becomes absolutely applaudable when Emma Thompson steps down from a role she's been given because of Disney still employing somebody who's got a whole history of harassing behaviour towards women. And I think she should be championed for doing that. And I mean, I don't know if anybody's read any updates on that. I don't know whether the guy's still in situ with that job. But I think that level of personalities standing up as well is how the Me Too campaign started to get its momentum. Is the bravery of the first few who then led the way, as it were. And I do think things are beginning to change.
Bad behaviour was normalised. It was all normalised. Being groped as a woman. I mean, to me, growing up, that was almost normalised. It came as part of the territory. Somebody to be allowed to touch your bum or all of that. And actually, it's not okay. And I think it's been wonderful for people to actually, do you know what? It's really not okay. And I think it's been a wonderful thing.
Well, from the days of, I was trying to explain to my some of my mentees the other day that back in the day, actually, you'd walk into some offices and men would have pictures of like page 3 girls in class, and they looked at me. These girls, the young girls, were looking at me. They just couldn't get their head. What do you mean? And I said, there used to be newspaper, and if you went to certain mechanics or something like that, the wallpaper, and can I just tell you, these young women could not get there. They're probably still standing with their mouths open. They could not believe that we put up with it. That we actually put up with it for starters. And I thought that was quite interesting. That to them, that was just that. It was the worst thing that happened. And she was almost saying, how did you all put up with it?
The argument for me for page 3 girls was, if they're allowed to have page 3 girls, why can't we have a full frontal male on page 3 as well? What? You couldn't see that, but that was their argument, that there was just a body. And then why not the full frontal male? But how do we say that women's success is judged? Is women's success judged in a different way to a man's success?
I think a lot of my clients are men, quite very successful men, not quite successful, very successful men, and I think, they might have the salary and the house and all the trappings and things like that, but they are trappings. So how success is measured across men and women is actually damaging to both people.
also you could be successful to the outside world, but really inside here you're literally just on your knees. So, which is why I said the thing about loving people. For me, I don't judge success in how much money somebody has or how much, their position. It's, are they actually happy?
Yeah.
So whether they're male or female, if they're not happy, then it means nothing.
Yeah. And if they're not happy, presumably, they need to do something ourselves. I'd ask you that, actually, Rebecca. Is it if you're unhappy, is change the thing that one has to instigate oneself?
Well, you can try. I have a lot of my clients act out, so they engage in damaging, deviant behaviour. The stereotype of the businessman doing stuff, that type of thing, because they are searching for something, but they are trapped within roles. And I'm not saying I feel sorry for them or anything like that.
Within gender roles.
But they're trapped within gender roles. And I had a man who was absolutely suicidal, and because he had lost his job, and he was suicidal. And I said, why can't you just downsize? He said, I can't downsize. My kids are in this school. It costs this much. My house, my wife will not tolerate us not living in where we live. So he was trapped like that. And in the end, it came around. He hasn't given himself. He got another job and that type of thing. But it was an eye-opener that their roles were propping each other, and their toxic roles were propping each other up, and they were both trapping each other.
So I think really what we're concluding this talk with is that things have changed. Do we think things have changed?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And are they going to continue to change, or is there a danger when we look at America and what's been happening there, particularly with the domestic abuse, that it's shaky ground still?
But that's like everything. You go forward, you might have a slight old guard, which I kind of think Donald Trump is to a great degree, that he's they're fighting back. But I look at the next generation. We're both mothers of sons, and I look at that next generation of beautiful young men that are coming through that we've had the joy and pleasure of raising. And it's either when he notices sexism or anything, or inequality, or whatever the inequality is. And I just think, wow, we've got an amazing generation of both men and women coming through, and they are going to keep that change. Donald Trump, no disrespect, he's the old guard, the old way, and he has those.
He got elected.
Well, he did, but I think when you always have a reaction. I think we need to bring men with us on this journey, and I think it's a really exciting time for men, because just like Rebecca described, that very old fashioned, now I feel, that's the kind of image of men that existed in my childhood. There was a huge amount of pressure for men to be the breadwinner, and that is a pressure. And now we can do it together. We can share the income, we can share all of this, and I think for men, rather than thinking that somehow feminism is this terrible thing that kind of takes their power away and they're lost, and that this, I know that the male suicide rate is appalling, and we need to look at that. But I think it's that thing that this should also be a wonderful opportunity for men to renegotiate their roles. I just think it's slightly further behind what's happening for women. I think this change started happening after the war, and they're just slightly behind in reviewing where their roles are moving forward. But I think it's a wonderful opportunity for men, and women to reappraise, what does being a man and a woman, and what are our roles in the years to come. And I think actually we'll find that there is very little division. I think in another 50 years' time we'll be at a point where really we're not having these conversations. At least that's what I hope. We'll just be, colleagues.
Yeah.
But we were talking earlier about the fuss that's being made of allegedly Prince Harry and Meghan's child, who they may or may not be bringing up as gender neutral. Like it would be a problem if they were bringing their child up in a gender neutral state. But I don't even believe that's a news story.
Yeah.
I don't give a shit.
Why is it a news story? And why is it being looked upon as some terrible thing, or something that's even questionable? I mean, and good on them if that is the case. I'm a mother as well. I know that so you, Lenny, and myself, we're certainly not dictating any kind of gender roles for our children. And I think that's our generation as well. That's up to our generation to do that. But then they go to school and there's so much pressure. It was National Book Day yesterday and all the girls were turning up with these ridiculous costumes on and all playing queens and princesses, including my own who wanted to be the Queen of Hearts. And I was so disappointed that she couldn't think of anything far more exciting to play.
I think it's about giving young people like seeing any backlash as a springboard for more change. I think that's the only way we're going to keep it going. And like little examples, when I went to school in Thanet, when I went to Dane Court, and when I was in year 7, we had to wear skirts. It was the uniform as girls. We did a petition. I don't want to wear a skirt, I want to play football. And so we did a petition and we changed it. And now they don't. You know, and I think it's about giving young people.
And that's
that
amazing.
voice.
And there's a lot of schools now where they wear trousers. And when I was at the school, I really, really, really wanted to wear trousers. And it wasn't even something you could question in the 70s. That's just, I mean, I did wear boys' shoes, but I wasn't allowed to wear trousers just because I was a girl. And I never quite understood why that was the reason I couldn't wear trousers.
Yeah. And equally, these girls that all went to school in their princess dresses doesn't mean that they're weak. It means they like a pink dress. Yeah. They might be feisty and strong underneath, and it's just clothes.
I did tell my daughter as Queen of Hearts to keep telling people off with their head if they want and to take that power, and if anybody was mean, she had that to say to them.
But you see, I don't know, I disagree with those, because I think the problem is, if a girl wanted to go to school, well, I don't know which school your kids go to, but there's this thing where if a girl's not wearing a princess dress, then she's not pretty. Therefore, she's not pretty, she's not going to get on. And all of these things, I mean, I think they're a load of old balls, to be honest with you, but they do still exist.
Yes, they do.
So that's what means it's just clothes. I disagree with that.
Well, I think about my own girls. My girls, I just brought them up, and they went through that princess phase, and then they came out the other side, and they would say it did not change their personality. If one day they wore, one year book group, my girl went and she had a full-on gold gimp suit, really, and I don't know what she was, but she was like, I don't even know if there was a book about it, but that's how she wanted to wear. But her personality did not change, and her core self and idea of herself did not change on the day she had this on, to the day she had the dress on, to the day that she went as a robot. It goes
back to language, doesn't it? It goes back to when we should stop just saying pretty to dresses. Let's stop. Let's change the language. Let's not make people.
Yeah, I mean, I was horrified. My daughter's best friend wears a lot of makeup, and she's 8, and I won't let my daughter wear makeup, and we have a lot of arguments about this. And I asked her why her friend had to wear makeup all the time, and she said, because the boys won't like her if she doesn't wear makeup. That was her term, what she said. I mean, that horrified me at age 8. This is her idea of why, her friend's idea of why she's wearing makeup, because the boys won't like me.
So in that sense, we haven't moved along at all, really. And I think that's getting worse with Instagram, and you have these bloggers and makeup companies who literally do target girls as young as 7 or 8, and it's just something that's instilled in young girls from that age. And your daughters are obviously well sorted, actually. I'd love to meet them, but a lot of girls don't find themselves out of those constraints of being pretty, and if they're not pretty or wear makeup, then they're not acceptable, and it just continues until you've grown up.
Just before we close, I was going to ask anybody in the audience if they wanted to make any observations from the Mary Beard book that they'd like to share with us. Nobody?
I can hear his little piece of it, I think. He's right there. He's travelled quite far.
I have got the book, and he managed to rip the front, so not on the side.
Panel, anybody got anything else to add from this discussion?
Well, the one thing I wanted to say is, as a teenager, I went into the bookshop, and all the intellectual books that you were meant to read were things like Jack Kerouac or Jean-Paul Sartre and all of this, and I was really aware that the only books that people ever recommended as being intellectual by the women were most of the women who'd gone mad and killed themselves. And I always thought, wow, this is really weird. I did think then, gosh, I'd love to write some books that were kind of interesting that would go on those shelves, because I thought it'd be really nice to have some women that we would go and find out that had happier endings. And I don't know.
Virago.
Well, you know, I did then find the women's press in a backstreet little sort of shop somewhere, and that was joyous. Yeah, it was extraordinary, but I still don't think that's changed. It is all changing, but like you say, it starts with language. Goes up back to Mary Berry, I don't know where Mary Berry. I'm seeing the cakes over there. You know, it all comes full circle. But actually, it started all those hundreds of thousands of years ago, and we haven't really changed in the sense that we need to start with language, home, education, and we need to build on with
yeah. Most of those dresses that little girls will probably wear come from films, which Disney, which I can't stand, is pumping out this stuff.
Yeah. And it does. You don't have to follow. My son was home educated, so he never got exposed to all of that kind of gender campaigning in a way. And he's got long hair down to him. He's very much his own man, completely, you know. But he just doesn't have that kind of I've got to be blue. Oh, I can't like pink 'cause I'm a boy, you know. And it's extraordinary. So it really does make a difference. And you know, it really is very much embedded and enmeshed in our society. And I think we really need to have a big look at how we raise our children and the messages we send out.
Because I remember I told you this story when I was a kid. I was playing in the park and in a den, and these two kids came, two boys actually. They said, "Get out of our house!" And I remember turning around, thinking, "Oh God, I want to play here." Turning around and literally just seeing my mother and father there. My dad was saying, "Go back in," and my mother didn't say anything. She just looked at me. And I was thinking, which is worse, facing my mother or going back inside there? Guess which one I did? I went back inside there. And that stuck with me for the rest of my life, actually. Just hold your own.
Yeah.
Like, hold your own. And that was from, I don't know, I was about 6 years old. Yeah. There was no question. It was just like...
And also back your kids up when they do make a stand. I had it at trick-or-treating last year. Knocked on the door. My son was, because I've got 3 children, a boy and 2 girls. He's the youngest, so he knocked on the door. This woman answered, and trick or treat, and she offered the sweets. So he took a sweet, and she said, "What are you doing? It's girls before boys." And all my 3 children went, "Oh!" And because in their head it was, he was there. He didn't have to go to the back of the queue because he was a boy, and so. My girls just said, "Come on, we're going." So off they went, and we talked about it. And he was humiliated by this woman and embarrassed, and that he had stepped out of line because he was there first, and the girls were so cross. So it's good when they do make a stand that you do support them.
And opening doors should be a polite thing that we do for everybody. Yeah. You know, I open doors for men and women, and my son does the same. And I think it's really important. It's kindness. You know, it's being thoughtful. Yeah. And that's not gender specific, is it? Yeah. That's just being kind. Yeah.
Well, I think that's probably, if we just leave everybody thinking about that, about how we bring up our children and how we move forward with the next generation. I know that everybody on this panel, we're doing our utmost towards that. Certainly towards a future of gender equality, and I think that's how we can close this very interesting discussion. Thank you, everybody.
So the women in this film weren't talking specifically about domestic abuse, but of course we put the panel together with our focus being working with those who are affected by domestic abuse. And power is a really, really integral part of that abusive pattern, because it's about one person's power over another and the ways that they maintain that power and then effect control of that person. It's a really serious issue, and Oasis works across Thanet and Dover, helping people in a range of ways with refuge services, community services, and we do quite a lot of work with children and young people who've been affected as well. We know that some of you watching this film might have been affected by these issues. So we would just like to say that there is help out there. Lots of people come forward and say, "I didn't think that was affecting me. I didn't think that what was happening to me was bad enough." But if you do need help, you can call the National Helpline on 0808 2000 24/7. If you would just like to support Oasis as a charity, we're always fundraising, we're always looking for more help, and you can go to our website to do that, which is www.oasisdaservice.org. If you live in Kent and you want support, you can go to the website www.domesticabuseservices.org. kent.org.uk, and you'll find services across Kent, including ours. And now we're just looking forward to the next POW festival and to thinking about what event we can put on for that, and we hope you'll join us there. Thank you.